Hello everyone and welcome to this special episode of my level 60 showcase. And yeah, the general idea of this was to go a bit back to the roots, like when we started out things as the hunter, and with the special turn that instead of like a hunter pet we have the warlock pet. And yeah, so that was the thought process. I wanted to go for a spec that is viable in PvP but also pretty okay-ish like in PvE kind of sense. And yeah, so that was the idea behind this build, and I want to go over in this video like what went wrong, what went well, what would I do again, what would I probably refrain from doing, so that you get a general idea of what happened and of what you probably should not go for, at least at the moment. There might be some things that went wrong in this case that will get fixed. I'm not too sure if there are some things that are just bugged out that are intended, but I will try to give you like a general idea of like the things I experienced with this build so far. And yeah, thanks for joining me on this. So yeah, since this was meant to be some sort of physical hunter DPS build, first I thought it would be fine to even go with some damage over time spells in it. The thing you always have to keep in mind with those kinds of build is like a general rotation, and it's really not that easy if you have a lot of global cooldowns to get a nice rotation going. So my idea was first, okay, I played Hunter on Wrath Lich King a lot, and to have at least like the Hunter rotation to some extent. So that included a lot of physical DPS, like of course with the auto shot, but also some magical damage, which in some cases was increased through attack power, which meant that a lot of the dots that come from like warlock or priest are not as effective because they scale with spell power and not with attack power. So that was the first thing that kind of made me think, okay, like halfway through the build I noticed I don't think it's possible for me to go for like both of the ways. It was really hard to spend the talent points in a way that yeah, you still would have been efficient. And I really noticed that like after the rotation and everything was set, also the buffs, I will talk about this soon, there is really not much room to go for even like some more spell power based yeah, damage over time. And that was the first thing I noticed, and it already made me think, okay, like the idea I had in mind is maybe like not the best thing, and I should restrain from it and probably should just try to go for a general physical ranged DPS build. Since we are talking about a ranged DPS build and rotation, the thing you have to keep in mind is like every time I use my auto shot and like use some spells in between, which makes this kind of rotation even viable in the first place, you can't really go for stuff like Frostbolt or Wrath, for example. So stuff like those spells, it was off the table like from the start. It just completely ruins any kind of auto shot rotation, and that's why I don't have any cast animation. But you also have to be careful not to go too much into like instant spells. I mentioned this before just because of the fact that global cooldown is a really big part in your rotation. So yeah, some spells and skills, talents I really wanted to go for, and I did in the first place, were like, since we are ranged and want to keep our distance, I went of course for Blink, Disengage, but also like Psychic Scream and Death Coil in case anyone gets near to send him back. Also of course the concussive shot, and you can see from this already that okay, this build is probably more meant to be in a PvP kind of playstyle, because those abilities don't really mean or do anything for you in PvE, except for maybe some sticky situations where Disengage and Blink is really nice to have, but like those kind of abilities are just totally PvP. So yeah, after those abilities were set, I also went for some general buffs like yeah, Demon Armor, Mark of the Wild, Blessing of Kings, Ice Armor, Aspect of the Hawk, Soul Link, True Shot Aura, and Water Shield. Water Shield, of course, like for some sort of mana sustain, which unfortunately it was not enough, but more about this later. Like I think I will do like a panel with just mistakes that happened. So yeah, speaking of Soul Link, as you can see, we also went for the pet. That was also like the general idea of having a companion, but instead of the hunter companion, having the warlock one. And this also, yeah, played a big deal in the whole build, and ultimately I think this is one of the biggest mistakes I made, but more about this later. Speaking of general skills and talents, I went with stuff like lightning reflexes, which increased your intelligence by 15%, with crusade, which increases the overall damage, with combat experience, which increases your total agility and intellect as well, or with improved mark of the wild, for example, which also increases your overall attributes. So those were the kinds of abilities I really wanted to go with to get a general stat build going. I also went into other trees, which also led to some mistakes, because the thing is, right now there are still a lot of things that are class masked, and the biggest concern right now is for ranged abilities or for ranged builds, that a lot of the abilities and talents really just increase your melee kind of attack power. For example, I went with the combat rogue ability Savage Combat, and this one increases your total attack power. Since rogue of course is went with melee kind of builds, of course also the talents there only increase your melee attack power, and I should have thought of this. I don't know, I think I was really careful with the things I picked, and the total attack power, I think this was the phrase that lured me into making a mistake here. What's okay-ish though is that since we, and that is interesting that it works, but since we have the serpent sting, which counts as a poison, basically your physical damage that you cause is increased by 2%. So this was no total fail, but this shows the overall problem that is currently the case with going for a ranged build, that a lot of the attack power upgrades really just scale your melee attack power. Same thing goes for a lot of talents that increase your strength to a ridiculous amount. There are a lot of spells that increase your overall strength and attack power, but those are really not for ranged, because strength does not do anything for you and as a ranged kind of damage dealer. So this is one of the biggest problems right now, I think. So yeah, after the general talents and abilities were said and done, with all the buffs I went for and the overall increase in damage and stats, one thing to mention is that basically our mana is PvE wise, it's really just to get our rotation going. PvP wise, it's really important in the sense that we also need to heal ourselves. By the way, I went with Riptide. I think this is one of the most powerful heal spells in the game right now, and that's why I went for this. And yeah, those kind of buffs, I think they are really nice to have for your purpose as solo playing, but even more of if you go into battlegrounds or raids, that you can provide even your teammates with some valuable buffs, and also with your companion. The thing this is I think really this companion was the kind of thing where things fell apart, since this is basically bugged right now, or maybe it's also intended to work that way, but this pet does no damage at all, and also his abilities don't work from time to time, and this was one of the biggest mistakes I went with. I also went with Pharaoh Spirit, and yeah, that's something I noticed. They pretty much despawn your current pet, and that's something, well, you can see here that this whole build, it really doesn't work out. There are a lot of things that work against yourself, for example the Spirit Wolves. There's no easy way to respawn a summoned Felguard, and yeah, it's basically, I went for a lot of stuff that just does not work with this current build right now and makes it pretty much unviable. One of the biggest things that I well, kind of hoped it would work, but just did not, is the Bestial Wrath. You were able to see that on one Ghost Wolf it actually worked at this time, but if I use it like on my Felguard, it does nothing. Also, like the talent I went with here, the Beast Within, also does not work. So those were a lot of ability and talent points that went straight to the gutter because yeah, they just did not work out. Same goes for a lot of those abilities that I, like after I learned this the hard way, I also did not want to go for anything like this, because I thought, okay, if like this kind of stuff is kind of class masked and bugged out, then like a lot of the abilities that increase your and your pet's DPS probably would also not work. I went for some duels to try this build like out in like at least a PvP kind of way, although I already kind of knew that it probably wouldn't work. The nice thing about this build is that since you have like plate armor and like a shield, you really are quite tanky, especially, and this is also something I went for, the Metamorphosis. If you activate that one, then yeah, as you can see, it does not go higher than this like 75% physical reduction is just the most you can get, and it enables you with a lot of cool stuff like Demon Charge and also the Immolation Aura. Like one drawback, and this is also something that I noticed in this overall build, is that the mana sustain is really hard to obtain. Water Shield does not provide you with enough mana, especially not like in a PvE rotation, but also not in a PvP kind of way. Like even if someone attacks you, the mana regen you get from those bubbles is just not high enough, and it basically makes this build pretty much unviable PvE and PvP wise right now. I really effed up on that part, I think. There were a lot of things that I hoped they would work better, especially that my Felguard would do a lot more damage. He does like 20 damage per hit or something. It's really low. And like especially the Bestial Wrath, and also being able to at least have the Feral Spirits out with my other pets. So I guess this is like stuff I could have noticed, and like this is also the kind of stuff I'm doing this for. Like the thing is, right now I'm pretty much stuck with this build since it costs around 400 gold with upgrading the talents and everything, so I can't really go for another run right now. It's really the way that this pretty much failed for the moment. I really hope that maybe I can make it work to some extent, but I hope even more that I might get provided with some ability essences to showcase a few better builds. Like, we learned from our mistakes, and I think this build was pretty much very mistake heavy, and I really just hope that I can improve on stuff like this, and I can share my thought process and my mistakes with you so that you don't do them. This build, like, it has some good things going for it, I think, like the general idea, and also I think like battle stance is a pretty nice thing to pick up, since it increases your armor penetration by 10%. So since we don't have any other stance besides the Metamorphosis like every 3 minutes, this is like a really nice thing to pick up. But another mistake that happened, and I think there's something that I really have to improve on in the general kind of sense, is that I wanted too much, you know, that I wanted to be viable in PvP and also viable in PvE, and this is just something that does not work out right now. It's really like if you look at those abilities right here, this is pretty much just PvP, and in general I would say ranged builds right now are really hard to get to work, since a lot of ranged abilities from the hunter spec also like correspond with having some kind of pet, and those pets and companions are just bugged out at the moment. So yeah, it might work out later, and like I really wanted to go with a ranged build since the melee build is still heavily nerfed. But the thing is just that, well, like all those talents and abilities that are like in the game right now, they really benefit your melee attack power, and you can increase your overall strength, your overall attack power, your weapon expertise. There's so much stuff you can do basically for your melee builds, and that's just not possible for your ranged at the moment. So yeah, like as some sort of summary, I would say that this build basically did not work out the way I wanted it to be. In case you have noticed, I also went for stuff like the unstable affliction. This is something I also went for with, like, for PvP purposes. Same thing with silencing shot, since like the thing I had in mind is, okay, since we are running away, keeping our distance, spamming our stuff, that the enemy we keep at range is basically trying to dispel a lot of his abilities or like debuffs he has going on him, and that basically with an unstable affliction I just would be able to counter that, silence him even more, and then maybe finishing him off. But a lot of like overall damage does not work. Like the bestial wrath does nothing. The metamorphosis is kinda okay, that works out, you do a lot more damage with that. But like the best thing would be, of course, if those two stack and you just deal immense amount of damage. But really not much works with this build. And yeah, I hope you are not too disappointed, and I really hope being able to show you something more like in the soon future. I also like level up another character right now, and I hope at least if I get him maybe around level 30-40, I can do some PvP with him. But yeah, this is it for now. I really hope that this build would work out better. It's really something that yeah, I imagined it to be in like different. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. I hope you still enjoyed. Sorry for rambling on like in the past few minutes. It's really hard for me to get the general idea through to you, and also like what went wrong with it. I try to do my best explaining it to you, and I hope you can understand it to some degree. So yeah, thanks for watching. I hope to see you guys soon with like another build, and yeah, until then, stay awesome and take care.